we'll take a moment to for a multi-faith grounding and a land acknowledgement. So I invite you to just take a deep breath with me and arrive. As we gather, we take a moment to remember that FAN is a multi-faith movement of individuals and communities from across Washington state. We are Buddhist, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Quaker, Sikh, Unitarian Universalist, and people of conscience. We celebrate our religious diversity and the unique wisdom that each faith tradition and spiritual practice brings to our work for justice. We also acknowledge that we gather across our state on the lands of 29 federally recognized tribes and those still seeking recognition. At this time, if you feel called, I invite you to write in the chat the names of the Indigenous communities where you are joining us from. We honor the people, both present and past, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. Alongside the Interfaith Network for Indigenous Communities, we seek to counter the impact of the doctrine of discovery and the Native American boarding schools and face the truth about colonization. We commit to centering the voices and solutions of Indigenous peoples in our communities and across our state. We pledge to work together towards justice and healing. Thank you, everyone, and continue to share the names. Well, we are so glad to have you with us today. And before we jump in, I want to highlight our agenda. Joyce already invited staff to introduce themselves, and we'll be sharing different slides throughout the presentation. And we hope to be a resource for you and support throughout the legislative session, wherever we're coming from. I also want to, before we get into invite people, if you haven't muted yourself already, we will have a portion for Q&A, but right now it helps the sound for everyone to be muted unless you are speaking. So for this time today, we are looking at Advocacy 101. Just as we are starting out, how do we advocate with FAN during the state legislative session? So we're going to be looking at why is advocacy so important, and in particular, why faith-centered advocacy is critical. We're going to talk about resources that FAN has for you throughout the legislative session. We'll talk about how to advocate. There'll be time to kind of have some tips and tools on sharing your personal story in advocacy, an opportunity today to take action and personalize a letter to your legislators. And we'll also recap and talk about next steps for the legislative session that's about to begin. So again, this is a basic introduction, Advocacy 101. And while we will have dedicated time for questions, feel free to put a question in the chat if it comes to you as we present. A staff member might be able to respond in the chat, and if we don't, we'll make sure we get to it during the Q&A session. With that, I'll turn to Elizabeth now.
First step is unmuting. Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Dickinson. I'm the partnership coordinator for the Puget Sound area primarily. I'm going to be starting us off at the very beginning with basics of what is advocacy and why advocacy. So just to ground us in the basics. So what is advocacy? Advocacy is speaking up for a cause or group of people to influence political, economic, and social institutions. And of course, that could look like trying to influence governments, corporations, radio stations, the broad range of institutions that we have in our society. FAN's focus, as you know, is to influence state government policy, programs, and budgets to align with our values and vision of the common good. It's important to remember that advocacy is aiming toward systemic change and addressing root causes. So it complements some of the other ways that we're active around our faith. It can mean not only communicating with our legislators or leaders, but also educating others and showing up for public actions that set the context for advocacy. And most fundamentally, it is democracy in action. Could we do the next slide? I'm not seeing. Thank you, Blake. So why advocacy? Why would we advocate? Why does FAN put so much emphasis on this aspect? We believe that our faith, our spiritual traditions call us to advocate, that advocacy is a spiritual practice that deepens our connection to the sacred through care for others, care for those who are most marginalized, and for the earth. And we base our advocacy on teachings to live out justice, compassion, hospitality, and earth care found in all of our sacred traditions. Next. Maybe I can do this too. So I just wanted to give you a sense of what justice is a value, how it shows up in the multiple teachings of the faith traditions to which we belong. So I'm just going to give you a minute to just look at these great, wonderful teachings from Quakers, Muslims, Jews, Christians, Buddhists, and more. So I hope you feel inspired like I do. And if you would like this slide, we'd be happy to send it to you afterwards. Next, please. We try to ground our advocacy in values and in mutual and accountable relationships. So that means these 6 values that we articulated last year, that we really honed in on last year. Belonging, which is our belief that in the inherent worth and dignity of all individuals and communities, and what that means for building a society that is inclusive and respects the rights of all. We are grounded in justice and equity. We are and seek systems that enable all people and communities to have the resources and opportunities to live a full and meaningful life. We are grounded in interconnectedness, that belief that we are all part of an interdependent web of existence. And so we support actions and policies that promote resilience, sustainability, and environmental justice. And finally, we ground our work in pluralism and embrace a society in which diverse religious communities and people of conscience seek to understand each other, fully engage in our democratic process, and experience free exercise of religion, speech, and peaceable assembly. Next. So not only do our faith traditions call us to advocacy, but we advocate because it makes a difference. Bread for the World has observed that federal nutrition programs provide roughly 10 times as much food assistance as private churches and charities combined. We also know that, for example, governments can protect civil and human rights in ways that private entities cannot. So I see our advocacy work as something that complements the work of charity and the other ways that we're engaged, but often bringing in the power and resources of the government can help us build a just society much with more efficiently and effectively. Next. So I love this quote from Representative Pramila Jayapal. that advocates create the space that makes it possible for legislators to do the right thing. And we do that in a number of ways. We do that by introducing a moral anchor for an issue. We share the lived experience of the communities that, of our communities and that our elected leaders represent, so they understand what we need. As advocates, we offer stories that our leaders can share with colleagues. We build ongoing relationships that can lead to further conversation. And we can help shape an agenda of what gets passed. There are so many bills that are introduced every session. Not all of them even get attention. And we know that if we can provide 7 contacts to a leader about an issue, that will cause enough attention to maybe give it some momentum. Next. So sometimes I just appreciate this, the specificity of what we win. So we just wanted to share, for example, that in 2024, not 19, we passed bias incidents hotline, which we know we're going to need, particularly in the years ahead. This will be piloted in 3 counties in 2025 and statewide by 2027. We expanded healthcare access for undocumented immigrants and won more than $28 million to support that. We won the mandate and funding to transition our school bus fleet in Washington, which is more than 10,000 buses, to electricity. And most recently, we saved education and childcare funding, the Climate Commitment Act, and Washington's long-term care program from the threats of ballot initiatives. So those are just some of the many things that we win when we work together. Next. Okay, so those were our whys for advocacy. And we just wanted to also give you a quick sense of the life of a bill. I'm not going to be talking so much about our opportunities to advocate. We want to make sure that we have enough time, but you can see those in the stars on the side. So the stars are next to where we can act. So a bill begins by being introduced by a legislator. And there are a number of bills that are already pre-filed, ready to go for this state legislative session. Sometimes a senator and a representative will file the same bill, and that can speed up the process if it's happening in both houses at once. Once it's introduced, it'll get a number and will get its first reading, which means just reading the title in the state Senate or House. Then it is assigned to a committee, usually a subject committee like housing or healthcare or energy. That committee may or may not take action on it. That is up to them. If they decide to take action, often they will have a public meeting or hearing, and that is certainly a time that we can weigh in and have some effect. So they may pass, they may take no action, they may pass the bill on, they may reject the bill. If it gets passed on, with or without changes, it goes to the Rules Committee, which is the committee that decides which bills that are coming in from all the committees from the House and the Senate, which ones should get to go on for floor discussion and vote. So if you have a legislator at the level of who's on the Rules Committee, you know that they have a lot of power, and you can take advantage of that. So the Rules Committee may decide to schedule it to go on to the House or Senate, or choose to take no action. So some of our favorite bills can get just hung up in the Rules Committee. If it gets onto the floor, that's the time that the members of our House, the House and Senate will debate it. And so contacting our individual legislators is really effective at that point. If the bill gets passed, we go into this to do the same process over again in the other house. And if there are, hopefully the vote will, the second house will just end up voting for the same bill. If the wording gets changed, or if there are things that the second chamber wants to do differently, then they will have to go into conference committee and agree on common wording, and then that bill will go back to both the House and the Senate to get passed in its newest version. Should by some miracle that happen, it goes to the governor. And the governor has three choices. He or she may sign the bill into law, veto all or part of it, or do nothing. A governor might choose to do nothing if they just don't want to be associated with the law, but they don't want to fight it. If the governor chooses to do nothing, it will become a law without their signature. And that was the less quick version than I had hoped for, but of how a bill works. But on to you, Jess.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. And as at least for me, like this process is, there's so many layers to it. It can be very fast paced at times, and it's a language that I'm still learning, even as a fan staff member. So today we want to highlight that there's 4 ways that you can just start to walk with us, and maybe you already are, to walk with us as an advocate with fans throughout the legislative session. The first one is just attending our legislative preview. That will be coming up January 9th from 12 to 1, or next Sunday, January 12th from 4 to 5 p.m. This is over Zoom, and it will give you a chance to learn about many of the different bills that FAN is supporting this session. And because we have so many coalition partners and so many different faith communities with a lot of different passions, we cover a wide range of areas. So this legislative agenda will look at economic justice, immigrant rights, so many different things. And so we hope that you can come to this preview. And one thing that we just invite you to say is, as you see this like long list of legislation, when we're starting out, it can really help to focus in on one area that you might be passionate about, or maybe even picking 1 or 2 bills that you want to follow during the legislative session. It's meant to be many different doorways that you could join in the advocacy. In addition to our preview, another great way of walking with us during this legislative session is making sure that you're signed up for FAN's e-news. Later in the presentation, I'll go into more depth on what we cover in this, but this is a great way to stay in the loop and up to date and have that delivered right to your email box. A third easy way to advocate during the session is by personalizing the Action Network letter templates that we create. And we will have an opportunity to do that together during this presentation later on. And finally, we really want you to save the dates and think about joining us in person. The Interfaith Advocacy Day will be in Olympia on February 20th. It's a rousing day of gathering to listen to speakers. We have workshops, we share lunch, we walk to the Capitol together, and we connect with people in our district to actually speak with our legislators with one voice, many different faiths and conscience backgrounds. And also there's an excellent Eastern Washington Legislative Conference in Spokane that Bree is especially involved in on January 25th for those folks who are on the eastern side of the state and want an in-person event closer to home. Okay, I'll turn it over to Bree to highlight some resources.
Thanks, Jess. So 2 resources to rely on. is our advocacy homepage. So for time, I'm just going to share the link in the chat rather than sharing my screen. But we have a drop-down menu, which will give you everything, almost everything, maybe not everything, but everything you need to advocate in the state legislative session. So it has information on our legislative agenda, issue fact sheets, and our bill tracker. Those will be updated in the coming weeks. The legislative session starts in a week, and advocates and coalitions are still kind of getting our things together to advocate this session with the initiatives this summer, as many of you know. Things took a little bit for legislators to see what the budget looked like. So keep an eye on that page. We'll be updating it. And then the second resource is the Washington Legislative website, which Jess will be walking us through. So back to you, Jess.
Thanks, Bree. So in addition to the FAN website, I want to talk a little bit more about what the weekly e-news looks like and how helpful it can be. During the year, we sent it maybe once or twice a month, but during the legislative session, we send it every week. And things that you can look forward to in that are policy updates from Kristen Ong. She's our policy engagement director for FAN, and she's at the Capitol during the session, representing FAN and also keeping us in the loop on the latest developments behind the scenes. And so we provide those weekly updates, especially related to FAN's legislative agenda. There'll also be opportunities, an actual link that you can click on to go to a committee hearing where you can virtually weigh in, pro or con, on one of the bills that FAN is supporting. So you would follow that link and you could sign in pro for rent stabilization bill, things like that. And it allows you to influence the legislative process throughout the session and not just on Interfaith Advocacy Day when you come in person. The e-news is also where we will be sending you opportunities to sign the FAN Action Network and sharing new templates as we create them so that you can personalize them and send those to your legislators. And finally, we have many different coalition partners. And so we also try to highlight any updates that they have that are relevant, if they have lobby days, and as well as invitations to actions. Next slide. So Bree was mentioning the state legislators website, and during the session, I would say the best companion to the FAN e-news and the FAN website is this ledge.wa.gov. It's for those who are really into advocacy, it's kind of exciting because it was updated this past year. It already was really helpful, but the goal was to make the website more intuitive for everyday people to track down policy information. And so there's a lot of great features that you can explore. And today I'm just going to highlight two helpful pages to start at if you are kind of new to advocacy. Next slide. The first one that we want to dive into is just when we think about, we've talked about why advocacy is so important, but another piece is thinking about who our audience is. Who are we trying to share our story with and influence? And these are the lawmakers that represent us at the state level. And so the easiest way to find out who that is for us is to go on the legislative website's district finder, which I'll take you to in a moment. And just a note, last year, there was some redistricting in the state of Washington. So if you're like me, you might find that your district has changed since you last were involved in advocating. So on this part of the website, we'll put in our address, and that way you'll see your district, your state representatives, your 2 representatives, 1 senator, as well as federal legislators. And when you click on their name, you'll be taken to their page where you can find contact information, the committees that they sit on, kind of like Elizabeth was mentioning. They're on the Rules Committee, where they have influence. You can see bills that they're sponsoring, their voting history, and my personal favorite is their individual websites, because there you can go and sign up for that legislator's email updates, where you'll get invitations to a town hall that they're hosting or a listening session. And when we follow our legislators in this way and we kind of get to know them and learn about them, learn about what their priorities are, about their life experience, that is going to help us in our messaging and finding common ground with some of their priorities and concerns, and making those links so that we can make our advocacy stronger. So I'm going to share my screen here now, and we're just going to do the district finder portion together. Okay. Are people able to see this? Okay, so Bree's going to drop the link in the chat for you to do it for yourself as well. But just to see how simple this is, I go in and it's already, because it's my computer, populated with my address, but I click on Find My District. And here I'm going to see, oh, I'm in Legislative District 7. Here's my representative, my senator. You can also see your federal folks as well. And from here, you can click on each of these legislators, and it will take you to their member page on the new website. Again, here you'll see a picture of them, so you can find them when pick them out of a crowd in person. Also, their contact information, committees they are on, their voting records, bill sponsorship. And I'm going to come back up here, also highlight, this is where I can go and find their website. And if I go to Senator Shelley Short's website, because I've been redistricted, I'm new, I'm just getting to know her, just even on the top, I can subscribe to her newsletter there. So that just kind of gives you a sense, I'll stop the sharing now, of how you can kind of navigate through to find some of your people and identify those legislators. Blake, thank you for reading my mind and starting to put the slides back on. So as Blake loads us up to our slide, I think 17. So that was just a really quick walkthrough of how to kind of navigate by finding your district and learning about your legislators. But I also just want to note one other page that you might want to save is leg.wa.gov/help. Here you'll find a link to the Legislative Information Center. And that is a great web page where the friendly folks in this picture are ready to help make the legislature more accessible to all of us. They have information that can help with documents. This page will also give you links to helpful online classes and tutorials. Like I'm going to watch a video on how to even find and track a bill, things like that. The other great thing on this page is the legislative hotline number. And during the session, this hotline is open from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m., Monday through Friday. You can call and leave a brief message for your legislators on an issue of concern, maybe a question you have about a bill. And that message is then forwarded electronically to your legislator based on the address that you give when you call. There are interpretation services for those whose primary language is other than English, and the hotline staff can also help you find a bill or a legislative document and answer questions about the legislative process. So they're here to help us, and it's a great resource to have on hand. Now to you, Blake.
Thanks, Jess. So we're going to do a quick overview of what the Action Network letter looks like when you're accessing it for various lobbying and advocacy concerns. So you can see on an average Action Network letter template, you have such a cause as stabilizing rent for Washingtonians this 2025 legislative session. And this isn't just a hypothetical example. This is something we can work on toward the end of our time together. So we're really excited for you to consider advocating with us on this issue. So the main thing you want to make sure you do is on that first page, fill out the information, much like I did here, and then your address, of course, and other things, so it gets to the right legislator. And then on the following pages, you'll be introduced to a letter template where you will introduce your personal story, which is incredibly important for making sure a legislator reads this and is captured by it. So we're trying to influence, right? We're trying to make changes. And so these kind of personalizations and these kind of campaigns are really important. And several of you may have experience of this, but several of you who it's your first time, these are tools that are used by a lot of folks, but Faith Action Network also uses them. So we'll have some time to go over that more toward the end, but just a brief overview of what Action Network does. And in this case, it goes to our senators and legislators also. So thanks, Jess. And now we want to open up for questions, making sure we've covered a lot of ground, especially if this is your first year, maybe doing advocacy with us. But we'll try to look in the chat as a staff, but we also want to take time to answer questions. And you can use the raise hand function if that's easier, or just simply raise your hand here.
Diana, I saw you raised your hand.
I did. This is really a wonderful presentation. You're recording it. Could we get a copy of the recording and use it at like our church for to get people on it who didn't sign on? I mean, that can watch it.
Yes, we'll be sending a follow-up email, and then that will include a access only YouTube link. So some of these aren't always public, but they will be if you have the link, certainly every time.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. Thank you.
Anyone else? Any other questions in the chat? Staff can jump in. Elizabeth, you're on mute still.
I'm seeing that Sandy has a question about, do I need to do all of these things? That's a great question. So Sandy, do you want to say anything more about all these things? Do you have any more? Can you want to specify your question further?
Sure. Well, you're presenting a lot of things that we can do. Advocacy week, going over to Olympia, writing letters and so forth. Are you, how involved should we think of getting, or do we need to go in this whole hog, or can we do it piecemeal? Thank you.
That's great. I think any one of us would say, putting your toe in is fabulous. So it can be overwhelming to begin. I think, as we said, choosing maybe one policy that you care about, choosing one way, you know, I'm going to write my legislator twice about this policy, this legislative session. The thing I want to do is go to IFAD and check it out. So absolutely, you do not have to do all these things.
And Sandy, I would just say, you know, go where you're feeling energized.
Yeah.
If you're someone who's like, I want to be around people and do this in person, you know, Interfaith Advocacy Day is a great start. If getting to Olympia is hard, or you don't have a lot of time, subscribing for e-news, and you can click on a few links as you're able to when you can. We want people to join at whatever rate or frequency works for you, and offer multiple different avenues for that.
And Ingrid, I see you have a question.
Yes, thank you. So my question kind of tags on to Sandy's, in the sense that I'm hoping there will be, as the session goes along, some specific info for certain bills on the key legislators. So like there's a lot of things I can contact my legislator, but they're already a sponsor. They're already on board. So it's not the most efficacious thing. Whereas if, let's say, Sandy or somebody else in the group happen to live in the district of a person that's on the rules committee or a person that's on another key committee, they need to know that. So they know that then their voice is like 10 times more important than some of the other voices for that case.
That's a really good point. Thanks, Ingrid. Our selective energy output, like we've mentioned, is very important. But we're today giving the tools to allow folks to go where they need to go on that. Those are really good points. And I wanted
So
to,
we'll be hearing that kind of information
you
because
know,
I don't know it.
right. And I think each legislative session is a new one for us. And we kind of play it by ear on what our network is requesting and try to accommodate the best we can. So I think it's an excellent request. And so we certainly try to, in the e-news, highlight certain committees you might be needing to send to, or those sort of things. So the e-news is a really crucial place for you to get plugged in. And I want to take a quick moment for Elizabeth's question in the chat. And she's asking, what have you found most helpful in raising awareness of an issue and mobilizing support in a congregational setting? So any staff are welcome to answer that, or if it's already been answered in the chat, we can move on to Laura's question.
So I would love to just respond to Ingrid also. If there is an issue or a policy that you and others that you know of are absolutely passionate about, let us know, because we will be looking at, we have a big agenda, but we're going to be choosing some bills to like write an Action Network letter on. So if we know that this is a really big thing for you, then we might be able to collaborate with you in creating such a letter that would then be available to all of FAN. So that's another way that we can amplify with other folks.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. So the way that we kind of thought about this, this advocacy time together was to give you the skills as individuals, mostly to do advocacy. We know that there's a whole other piece which is relating to your congregation or the community that you're involved in. We're going to spend more time on that on the 15th. In what we're calling someone help me, the liaison. You don't have to be the liaison, but that will be more focused on what you can do within your congregation or your community as far as sharing this, getting other people energized. So I would point you to that. And then also, I know that any one of us on staff would be happy to have a conversation with you about that. Laura.
Well, now I'm wondering if my question matters because I was thinking about the best, I noticed on the new website. I'll just ask my question. What's the best way to contact them, our representatives? Because sometimes I know that FAN, provides a way to contact through FAN. But is that coming as a, I mean, I've heard that a lot of times our representatives won't pay attention to or pay very little attention to if it looks like it's coming from an organization where it's like mass people are clicking as opposed to individual letters. And then there's like, now I've seen like on one email address, to contact them directly, which goes through the state legislature. Another one is a direct, another way is a contact form on their website. And it's just like, gosh, does the hotline message really get through? So that was my question. Another answer for information, I think the Ingrid was asking is, I think on the FAN website, you have the, issue page that has a lot of background information on a lot of the issues. And then it used to be on the bill tracker, the bill number would be a live link. So if you click on that, it takes you right to the legislative bill page so you can read the bill yourself. I think, is that what you were asking? Just more, no. Oh, okay, sorry. I misunderstood. Anyway, back to my question. What is the best way to reach them? Anybody else?
One thing I could say, Laura, is that it might also depend on your legislator. I definitely, like, you know, with Senator Brad Hawkins, he really paid a lot of attention to people who showed up at his listening sessions, or when I made a phone call. You know, so I think I would just imagine, you know, obviously if someone gets a ton of action letters, you know, related to a certain topic, that's going to tip them off something's happening. But I think the more that we can personalize things, the more time we put into it shows how we're committed to it. But I would say that we could even ask our legislators this themselves, and we might get a different answer based on the person, and also trying different avenues. Just that's a
Right, and that's what you're trying to do with those form letters, to personalize them. It gets away from the, people are just making one little click and they're done saying they support something. So yeah, great, thank you.
And I'll add, if you wanted to even personalize it farther, you could even copy the text and put it in your email yourself, and email your legislators directly. It takes some of the ease out of it, but yeah. And Eleanor, I think this will be our last question, and then we'll have to move on to our
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. This might not be directly a legislative advocacy question, but it could turn into one. I'm wondering if Fan has heard, maybe through the grapevine, about immigration deportation, because I think the federal government has a FAST Act to, they're going to implement their plan. And I'm seeing through some of, like, Washington Immigration Solidarity Network, some other organizations, that they have kind of a rapid response team that is engaged. Have you heard anything? And so do we go to our legislators to complain, or to voice our concerns?
Eleanor, thanks for raising this. I'm happy to speak to this really briefly. If you're on the FAN e-news, you've maybe already received our 4 action steps that you can take now for deportation defense that are from the Washington Immigrant Solidarity Network. So, and before this is done, I'll try to drop that in the chat. But again, like, following the lead of Wizen for sure. Those, in addition to getting involved locally, it doesn't hurt to let our legislators know that we're concerned about our neighbors, and we are going to show up for our neighbors. And so you can let them know, but again, it will be, unfortunately, in this area, in terms of immigration policy, that'll be a federal representative. FAN is part of a statewide immigration roundtable, and so as we go into this coming month, if there is a big action or an important letter for us to be working on in a federal way, we will share that through the e-news. So I would encourage you to sign up for that so you can be in the loop.
Thank you.
Great questions, everyone. We have just about 15 minutes left. And we'll continue to, staff will kind of respond to questions in the chat, and make sure we get any extra questions answered. But we're going to pivot a little bit to talk about messaging, and we've talked about contacting your legislators, and now we're at the point of, what do you say when you are contacting your legislator? So I really like this quote from Nancy Amade, because it highlights the importance of sharing our stories with our legislators. So it says, experts can be hired, real people with real stories cannot. Legislators get reports and data about an issue from experts and staffers. The Senate Committee Services does whole presentations on different issues. But what they don't get from that is the stories of how an issue is impacting their district and their community. And that's where you all come in and where our voices can really be vital. So whether you're writing a letter, an email, submitting written or in-person testimony, or meeting with your legislator in person, it's important to know what you want to say and how to make your message effective, because often you have pretty limited time. In a legislative meeting, you probably have 15 minutes. An email or phone call, you're limited to that medium, and testimony, you only get 3 minutes, I think. So we'll walk through some messaging guidelines. So next slide. So think about developing a story. So we have kind of these different points that these different questions that can kind of guide you along the way. So begin with sharing who you are. What do you want your legislator to know? And think about what might build your credibility as a messenger. So this could be that you're a lifelong constituent of their district, you're a member of a faith community, you're a parent, grandparent, doctor, social worker, what have you. And then briefly share about the issue that you're coming to them about. So what the issue is, briefly. Sometimes we can get in the weeds, why you care about it, and why they should care about it. So this part is an excellent chance to share a personal story. And you can incorporate a few talking points or statistics, but remember not to get lost in the weeds of the policy or go into too many details, because you can always follow up later if needed. And then once you've explained the issue and kind of given some context to it, you can present a solution. And we know policies aren't a fix for everything, but for the purposes of this exercise, imagine it as a solution to a problem that your legislator can be a part of solving. So you've come to them with this issue, this problem in your community, and they're the heroes in this story. They have the ability to pass this legislation, to fund this program that would help your community in a tangible way. And at the end, always end with a call to action. Be as specific as you can. For example, if a bill is waiting on a floor vote, you may ask them to bring it to a vote and vote yes. Or if it's in a committee that your legislator sits on, you might ask them to vote yes and pass it out of committee. Next slide. And so some things to remember: you want to keep it personal, focused on stories and values. We can't emphasize it enough. Share about why you care about the issue, how it's impacted you or people around you. And I think this is a very critical place where voices of faith and conscience can speak up, because often our values are broadly felt and shared. Even if a legislator may not be on board with your specific policy solution, they might share and resonate with those values or your story. And also, just remember to keep it simple. Every story has a beginning, middle, and an end. And overcoming a challenge is often a classic storyline that you can think about when crafting your story. And we're going to give you some time to practice. Let me get this link real quick. As we mentioned, we've got the Action Network letters. Oh, there's the link. And so one of the bills is rent stabilization. One of the bills we'll be advocating for this session is rent stabilization, which would stabilize rents at 7%. Or not stabilize rents, sorry. That's rent control. Big difference. It would stabilize rent increases to only 7% annually. So it would limit them. And I think we'll give you a chance. We're a little tight on time, so think about some of those story tips and maybe draft a little bit about it. There's a kind of sample cue for personalizing your letter. So if you want to personalize the beginning, I'll briefly share an example of what I would write to maybe spark some juices, and you can continue to work on it even after our time is done. So this will be going to the Senate and the governor, because the Senate is where we really need to do the work for the bill. It passed the House last year, and we have a new governor, Governor Ferguson, and we don't really know where he's at with this bill. So far, he hasn't been supportive or against it. So here's an example. Hello, Senator Riccelli. My name is Brianna Diltz, and I'm a part of Faith Action Network, and I'm a lifelong resident of Spokane living in the 3rd District. First, thank you for your support of many of our bills last year, especially reducing hunger for school-age kids. I hope that you will continue to support policies that further justice and equity by pledging to support and prioritize passing rent stabilization this session. As I mentioned, I've grown up in Spokane and I've watched housing prices climb and affordability plummet. As a renter, I've seen my rent rise and my spouse and I's opportunity to purchase a first home disappear. On top of sky-high rents, many renters receive annual rent increases of 5% or more. Even just a 5% increase on a $1,000 a month apartment, which isn't very much in this day, adds up to $600 per year. My friends and family have received increases of 20% or more. Excessive rent increases destabilize communities and lives. This year, the legislature has the opportunity to pass a common sense solution to limit annual rent increases to 7%, a stable amount that renters can prepare for and landlords can still make repairs and a profit. Please prioritize and support rent stabilization. Thank you. So that's just an example, kind of the beginning end. They can come in, they can pass this solution, and they can be the hero and help their communities. So we will continue from there. And agreed, I see that in the chat, even 7% is too high. That's one thing this session, we'll get into this in the legislative preview, but we want to keep it at 7% and not go any higher because it raised from 5% to 7% last year. So I'm glad you noted that. And I will pass it to Blake to talk about some ways to stay engaged.
Thanks, Bree. And thank you all so much for attending today and spending your Sunday afternoon with us. We know your time is valuable and your advocacy even more so. So here are some crucial ways you can stay engaged during our legislative session. So first, make sure you attend FAN's legislative preview. Several of you have been asking about our legislative agenda, and more of those details will be revealed and confirmed during those times, and certainly by session. So make sure you're there. You can just click the events tab on our fanwa.org website, and that will get you to the registration link. Also, make sure you sign up for FAN's weekly e-news. This is crucial for legislative updates, as well as other pieces of legislation that's happening that you may need to know about. And then, as we've shared just a moment ago, personalized FAN's Action Network letter templates. So you'll get a lot of these during session, and we've already started one with the rent stabilization. So we hope you'll consider advocating for housing rights and adding your voice to our advocacy. And finally, we really encourage you, especially if you haven't been before, attending FAN's Interfaith Advocacy Day on February 20th in Olympia. So this will go on from about 8 to 3 o'clock. We'll include a time of getting to be more equipped in sessions just like this with our other coalitions and from staff, as well as time with your direct legislator to advocate for issues and on FAN's legislative agenda. And then finally, be sure if you're on the east side of the state to join Bree and other staff to be at our Eastern Washington Legislative Conference on January 25th. So if you have any questions about any of those events, please don't hesitate to reach out to our staff if you have our emails already, or our email at fan@fanwa.org, or you can ask your questions in the chat now. So thank you so much for being here, and we hope you have a wonderful Sunday. And we'll be sticking around just for a couple minutes if there's some immediate questions, but thank you so much for your advocacy and your continued work for hope and justice with us. Take care.